Thank you for tuning in to the Logic of God podcast. I'm Cody.
I'm Gina.
And I'm Ben.
If you're returning, thank you for coming back. And if you are a new guest, welcome.
So Genesis 44, we left off with Joseph's brothers returning to Egypt. They finally decided they were hungry enough to go check on Simeon. And now they've had a feast and we're moving into uncharted territory. And I kind of want to preface this episode by saying that the deeper we get into Joseph's story, the more engaging and exciting it's becoming. And the more time that we're spending talking about it, but also debating about it a little bit, but also studying it. And I don't know, this is an awkward subject, but I want to talk about it for a minute because we are 118 episodes in now, and I did the math. I did math.
Oh, did you?
Yes. I know it's scary, but I found out that myself, not including the time that Ben spends editing and researching and doing things on his own, and not including Cody's time researching and editing and all of the other things that he does, I spend about 1,500 hours a year on podcast related things. And if you do the math, the average full-time employee of a business works 2,080 hours a year. So I'm working like close to a full-time job doing the podcast, which is really interesting because we also all work full-time jobs and have other commitments and obligations. And so I wanted to mention that tonight because we put in a lot of work and I want to acknowledge you both, but I also want to tell our listeners about it. And I hate doing that, but I feel like it's necessary because we've come to a point in our size and in what we are producing where I think we need a little boost from our listening base. And so if you're listening and you enjoy what we do and you want us to do more of it, please feel compelled to pray about generosity or giving to the podcast financially. We've never, in all of the years we've been doing this, asked our listeners to consider that, but our operating expenses are rising, our time commitment is rising, and we love doing this, and we're not going to stop even if the financial side of things isn't opened. But I want to bring it up because I'm going outside of my comfort zone and because this is a ministry that serves thousands of people on a monthly basis, and we love you guys. So if you feel compelled to pray about that, or if you have thoughts and want to reach out and talk about that, please feel free to do so, because combined, I think we're probably spending close to 3,500 hours a month total through all of us and our various studies and just time spent editing and everything. And it's a lot, and we love it, but we need your help to keep going. So
Yeah, and if you want to look at some of the things that we have in the pipeline and what we're trying to do, like this Genesis study, we would like to publish a outline and book and study guide to go through Genesis and have a physical copy of that. We've also started doing some different type of assessments and just different ministry objectives that we're trying to reach that this money would be used for. So
it's not for paying us. This is just to continue.
No, the reality is there's a lot that has happened behind the scenes we're never going to fully tell anyone. It's like a pride-swallowing siege on behalf of Gina and Cody especially that was very hard to live through and to watch. And there was a point where, again, we can't go into it too much, but Cody had lost his job and he was trying very hard to make ends meet, and throughout all of the horrible things that were happening in the time where it would have been very helpful to get some financial help from the podcast, neither one of them ever wanted to or asked anyone to donate money through the podcast. We made a point of never bringing it up or talking about it because we never want anyone to think we're trying to get rich off of this, and it's not the point. It's not even to get any kind of payment for us through the podcast. The point is that there are things that we can do through this podcast as a ministry. And unfortunately, we're getting to the point where if we want to continue to expand, those things that we want to do will cost money. And we can't continue to bankroll all of it ourselves.
And I just want to celebrate too, because we've gotten to the point as a podcast where we are on every single continent except Antarctica.
We'll get there.
I know, but it's really mind-boggling. And we've had several people reach out and tell us that they don't have access to church. And so we are their church. We are the ones who are discipling them through the podcast, but also through their contact. So when they contact us via email, social media, through our website, there are lots of different ways that people reach out to us. And we respond to every single one of them personally, individually. We're praying with them, for them. Cody's went and had coffee with one of our listeners. So we really do try to be authentic and genuine and making sure every single person who contacts us is discipled in some way. And contributing to the podcast would also contribute towards that.
So if you're interested in giving us literally anything, any kind of donation would be really appreciated. You can go to our website at www.thelogicofgod.com, and there's a donate button there. And if you click on that, there's a way that you can donate. We are a 501c3. Any donation is tax deductible. So keep that in mind. You can look forward to a statement sent at the end of the year. Even if it's $1, we'll send you something.
And also, I would like to point out that we are not going to do this every episode. This is just a one-off opportunity that we've been praying and talking about. So don't feel like we're going to be laying it on thick, because we're not. One time in 118 weeks.
Yeah, we'll have this conversation again in another 2 years.
So moving into Genesis 44, let's start in the scriptures. So Joseph tests his brothers. Then he commanded the steward of his house, fill the men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put each man's money in the mouth of his sack. And put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest, with his money for the grain. And he did as Joseph told him. As soon as the morning was light, the men were sent away with their donkeys. They had gone only a short distance from the city. Now Joseph said to his steward, "Up, follow after the men. And when you overtake them, say to them, why have you repaid evil for good? Is it not from this that my Lord drinks, and by this that he practices divination? You have done evil in doing this."
Oh.
This is okay. Why a cup? Jubilees has a funny thing to say about the cup. Don't you know that a man just likes his cup?
Yeah, it's my cup. It's the cup I drink from. I love this cup. What are you doing taking my cup that I love, that I drink from?
It's just, it's like he went, and Benjamin is accused of sneaking into Joseph's like cupboards and just like stealing his exotic silver tumbler and just like tossing it in his sack. And Joseph's like, "Man, steward, I'm looking all over the place. I can't find my cup anywhere." Man.
I like it.
It must be those dang Hebrews.
They're filthy.
It's got that sweet logic of God picture on it. Man, I really like that cup. It must have been those darn Hebrews stealing our cups and taking
A man's
all
cup is
silver.
Sacred.
A man's cup is his own private kingdom.
You know what they say, never touch another man's cup.
I didn't know they said that, but now I did.
It's biblical.
Okay, I believe you.
Anyway, I find the whole cup thing really interesting because in ancient Near East culture, a cup represented communion and judgment. And throughout the Bible, there are many examples of cups being used. In this case, it is a cup of divine knowledge for divination, but there is also a cup of wrath featured in Psalms, Isaiah, and Jeremiah. And then there are cups for blessing, fellowship, and baptism, so in Psalms and Mark. And then obviously in the Last Supper and just Jesus' story, the cup is a major factor in things that Jesus talks about. Like even when he's praying to the Lord in the Garden of Gethsemane, he says, "If this cup can pass from me." So the cup is a big deal.
It's also worth noting in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 21, Paul says, "You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons."
Yes.
And I would argue that the cup that Joseph is partaking of is a cup of demons, and we'll get to that shortly.
In verse 5 here, you have the steward saying to these men, "You have done evil in doing this." They're being accused of taking an object that for all intents and purposes we would consider to be evil. The Hebrews would consider to be evil, and they're afraid of being accused of doing evil, even though they are righteous in the sight of the Lord. Interesting. So Jesus versus Joseph in cups. They both use cups to expose guilt and allegiance. And Joseph's cup is a symbol of his wealth and self-derived revelation. This is an Egyptian divination cup. And both Joseph and the steward claim that Joseph practices divination. It's very interesting.
I went down a weird rabbi hole in this particular section because I had the thought, okay, so what if the word for divination here is separate from the word used for divination in places like Leviticus, where it specifically bans the practice of divination? Maybe it's a separate word. I found that it's the same word. However, in looking up the word, I saw something very interesting. And this isn't something that we brought up before, I don't think, but I wish we had, because it's an interesting word. In Genesis, when Satan shows up in the Garden of Eden, he's referred to as a nahash, a snake, a serpent. That's one of a couple words that's used for snakes in the Bible. What's interesting is the word for divination here is nahesh, all of the same consonants as nahash. Now, you may hear that and think, okay, so what? Like the word more and the word mare, M-A-R-E, have the same consonants, but more and mer aren't even close to one another. In ancient Hebrew, as it turns out, remember, we have talked about this before, but in ancient Hebrew, there were no vowels, just consonants. Vowels were added much later in the Second Temple period. And so initially, all you had were consonants, and context told you how to say things. Once vowels were added, then you had the different spellings based on the vowels. But what's also interesting is there are certain words that you can see are directly connected because they're spelled with the same consonants. In ancient Hebrew, if something is spelled with the same consonants, or they're spelled with almost all the same consonants, but aleph is added, then there's meant to be a connection. As an example, for the name for Adam, Adam, has an aleph in it, and the word dam means blood. Adam means man, dam means his blood. The aleph there that's added to Adam means that Adam is greater than his own blood. He is the higher thing, the more important thing. And similarly, the different words melech, meaning king, versus malach, meaning messenger or angel. The messenger, the malach, the angel, is greater than the melech, the king. So when you see things spelt with almost the same consonants, or especially the same consonants, you're supposed to draw a connection between the two words. So there is definitely a line that the Hebrew here is drawing between these two words, between nahash, meaning serpent or the devil, and nahesh, meaning divination. Effectively, what it is saying is that the serpent, the devil, is whispering something in your ear, is trying to tell you something through omens or through the attempt to divine the nature of the universe through some method other than God.
And this is backed up in all of these scriptures that have been added to our outline, which I didn't add.
I didn't add them.
Cody, you did it.
So Cody, why don't you expound a little bit?
So like just other places that divination is brought up, you have it with Laban in Genesis 32:27. You have divination brought up. It is not, and this is not to be confused with what most people say the divination in Genesis with Joseph means. Oh, he was just pretending or practicing. This is the same word used as a direct connection to divination or trying to pursue knowledge outside of the current realm. Like it is the practice of trying to connect with something spiritual. And it's brought up in Genesis 32:27 with Laban. We know he wasn't a God-fearing Christian man. You got the condemnation of it against Jacob. So there will be no nahash against Jacob in Numbers 23:23. The practices of divination being forbidden in Deuteronomy 18:10. And none of these are ever used in like a test or a play or just a pretending. This is a very clear instance of divination being used and forbidden. So the Deuteronomy one is the one that connects most to Moses. If you believe the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible are written by Moses. He doesn't ever use divination as a pretend method or a practice or a testing. It is always used in a direct connection to pursuing knowledge outside of one's own knowledge.
And it's pretty clear why when you see the connection between the devil in earlier Genesis versus divination here. Like, if the word is supposed to be so similar, again, you're supposed to be making the connection. And so effectively what Joseph is saying is, didn't you know that I could speak to the devil and learn things about you? And that's not something you joke around about. I understand that some Jewish tradition is trying to skirt this. And in fact, a lot of Christian tradition tries to skirt this issue because it's a huge issue. But when you look at it in those terms, in terms of the Hebrew linguistic method of trying to show you something by connecting words, they are very clearly trying to tell you that Joseph is claiming that he is speaking to the devil or to evil spiritual forces, let's say, even if you don't want to go so far as saying the devil. Doesn't matter. Evil spiritual forces to try to ascertain something. That's what he's saying, and that's what his steward is saying. And so it is a serious issue, even if he isn't actually doing it, and I believe he is doing it. He has the cup for it, and he drinks from it. And as said before, you cannot drink the cup of Christ and the cup of demons.
No, and the idea behind this, and we brought it up on one of the previous episodes, would it be okay for a Christian today to go tell everybody that they're practicing satanic worship, that they're doing satanic sacrifices, even if they weren't? Is that okay?
Just to test people's reactions.
Yeah.
Hey, by the way, it's Halloween. Let's get out the Ouija board. We're going to do a podcast episode. We're going to summon Solomon.
But the other reason I thought it was interesting, the linguistic connection here, is because of, Cody, what you've been talking about this whole time. I think it's a further connection between the story of Joseph and the story of the fall of the devil. Now, again, it is frustrating because when we talk about these things, it sounds like we're taking a big dump over Joseph and everything that he does in his character. No, the point is that he's become more and more Egyptian as time has gone on. And in becoming Egyptian, he's adopted a lot of the practices that Egyptians had he should never, ever have adopted. He's said, like in naming his son Manasseh, he has forgotten his father. He has forgotten his family. He's forgotten where he's come from. And a lot of where he's come from is tied up in Christ and his lineage. To reject his past is, yes, to reject the pain that came from it, but also to reject where he's come from and what his father taught him. And so in rejecting that, he has turned away from it to the only other thing that he has, which is the evil practices of the Egyptians.
And if you stick with us through the end of Genesis, you will see the fulfillment of this. This is not just us making casual, callous assumptions. There is fruit, and we can show you the receipts for why it is evident that Joseph was fully assimilated into Egyptian culture.
Yeah, and just reading the story with this new lens, like, never did I read the story of Joseph and be like, oh, that changes my life. Like, that's good. It's like how people interpret Job. Oh, bad things happened to him. He was faithful, so he was elevated.
And God doesn't give you more than you can handle.
Yeah, so it's the same reasoning with this. It seems like it's been whitewashed and has no like personal application or future application. It's just, okay, bad stuff happened to him, but he got his in the end. Like, he was elevated. He was commander in chief, second in command. Like,
they were reunited, and that should be good enough for us, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There's no trauma with that at all.
And the traditional story kind of treats his brothers like bumbling morons who can't figure anything out. And Joseph immediately knows everything. And he's, I know their hearts now. I know they're decent people, but to test them, I'm going to do all of this awful stuff and pretend to commune with the devil with a divination cup.
And if Jacob were still the man that we thought he was, the man that wrestled Jesus, the man that erected altars and anointed stones and did bold acts of faith for the Lord, then he would never have stood for his son behaving like this.
And we'll see this later. I don't want to get too deep into this because we're already all over the place. Yeah. But it's interesting to me that Jacob hears from the Lord after the events of this story, basically at its conclusion. I think there's a very good reason for that.
Yeah, and it's not, oh, you did well. Well done, my good and faithful servant. No, it's not that.
And considering how often he heard from the Lord before then, like throughout much of his life, it feels like there was a long stretch of time where he wasn't hearing anything.
If you do need textual receipts and evidence for the connections between divination and the serpent, there are plenty of resources available to you. We are happy to share what we use. There's some in the outline if Cody wants to share them. But this is a well-documented, talked about, scholarly application of this word.
Yeah, so Dwayne E. Smith has a decent article on the Mesopotamian snake, the divining snake context that kind of makes the same connection. Not exactly the same, but you get the idea behind it. And that's a good scholarly work that is not, don't take our word for it. Go and do your own research, but this is what backs up what we're saying. You also have K.R. Joins, the serpent symbolism in the Old Testament. That's another one that takes this serpent motif and divination idea and puts it exactly where Ben just led us. Check up on us if you don't believe us.
Oh, I thought I was being novel.
No, it is. It's very good.
There's nothing new under the sun. Any connection that I'm making, I'm only making because it's there. And if it's there, God has shown it to someone before. But it's frustrating because it almost feels like a complete new discovery because this story has been told 1,000 times the same way. But I've fallen in love with the story of Joseph all over again because this makes the whole story feel real.
Yeah, it's not this unattainable, unachievable, biblical patriarch that we put on a pedestal. This is a real life guy. It connects with you and I more, I think. It connects with the average person, and the lessons taught from it actually connect more than the traditional reading that I think we've all been taught and whitewashed and put on the pedestal.
You get a lot of variety in the Bible in personal character or identity kind of tropes. So you have David, the musician and the poet, and you have Solomon, the very wise man who was very unwise in how many women he married. And you have Queen Esther, this regal, quiet woman who did what she had to do. And there's just so many people that you could emulate if you really researched them. But Joseph is one of the difficult ones. I think all of the patriarchs are pretty difficult because they go all over the place. But the thing about Joseph that really stands out to me is that he's a dreamer. His brothers mock him, calling him a dreamer in his youth. And I think we have to remember the deep, rich inner workings of this man's mind because I don't think it shuts off. And I think that's why he's so all over the place. And I think that's what makes him more relatable to me personally is just, I think through every potential outcome, every possibility. I'm adopted. And so there was a former me that daydreamed about what it would be like to reunite with my family. And thinking through Joseph and all of the years that he spent wondering and the what ifs and just the anger and the rage. There are days now where I feel angry at my family for the way that things have gone. So how is it unrelatable to us when we really look at the emotion and the conflict and the trauma and the stress behind some of these things? You don't just magically get over it. And you don't say things like, I'm playing with the devil, so you should know that. And I really like my cup. That's not logical here. There's reasons behind it, and it's so layered and nuanced, and it makes Joseph relatable in ways that he's never, ever been. And that's what we're hearing from listeners. There are people who are really uncomfortable with how we're describing Joseph. There are so many other people who reach out and they're like, oh my gosh, I never thought of it like that, and it's changed my life.
And it's interesting you bring up familial unforgiveness. Over this last weekend, I was actually up north in Wisconsin with my family, and we were effectively burying the remains of my grandmother. She had died a while back, but she had donated her body to science, and after that was done, they cremated the body. We have the remains, and so we buried the remains. What's interesting is that, I can't remember if it was around a month ago, maybe a little bit less time, but my dad had a dream, which he was certain was from the Lord, and I agree, I think it was, where he dreamed that he was standing in front of the family at the site where my grandmother's headstone was, which is next to my grandfather's headstone. And he was talking to the whole family about how great my grandmother was and how you really couldn't find much fault in her. She was amazing. However, my grandfather was a different story. He had been unfaithful to my grandmother, and he'd been somewhat abusive to not just my father, but my uncle and my aunt. And he was a great man, and he had a lot of positive qualities, but he did a lot of things that needed to be forgiven. And he felt the Lord was putting on his heart that his brother and his sister needed to forgive his father, and he needed to be the one to talk to them about it. So when we went up north, eventually there was a natural point. It was very surreal. They were talking about something miraculous that had happened to Dad, and Dad came in and he was able to tell them the full story. And he said, the thing that the Lord has put on my heart, speaking about God doing things in my life, is Mom was amazing, but Dad did a lot of bad things, and he hurt the both of you really badly. And while we're taking the time to honor Mom, I think you need to be able to find it in your heart to forgive Dad. And what's very interesting to me is both my uncle and my aunt embodied the two different sides of Joseph we see in this story. My uncle said nothing really, but he started crying like almost immediately. Like you could tell that he'd borne a lot of hurt from what my grandfather had done to him, and it was really hard for him. But it was something he needed to hear, and he did need to be able to forgive his dad for the things that had happened decades ago at this point, because my grandfather died before I was even born. And yet you can tell how much hurt he was still carrying from this. My aunt, on the other hand, she didn't really have much of a reaction to what my dad was saying. And she said, I don't know that I can really forgive him because I don't remember anything. She basically had forced herself to forget. That was her way of handling it. And you can tell she still bears the scars from the pain, but she doesn't want to face it. She doesn't want to remember, and it still hurts her, even though she doesn't remember. But she can't face it because she doesn't remember. We see Joseph doing both of these things in this story. It's very human. It's very understandable. He doesn't want to face the pain, so he forgets. But it doesn't change anything. You can't move forward. And that's why we see Joseph taking on the worst parts of the Egyptians, because he refuses to face his past. And once his past comes to confront him, he lashes out. And we'll see that he goes up to a line and almost crosses it. And it's only through an act of love and kindness from his brother Judah, one of the least of his brothers, if we're honest, from the story that we saw before. But it's only through this act that he's able to confront his past and truly forgive. And after we see that act of forgiveness, he is able to move forward. And we see much more of the old Joseph return. And we see a lot more acts of kindness and generosity and genuine forgiveness. The only way for you to make yourself right with God is to forgive. He will not forgive you if you cannot forgive your brother or your sister or your mother or your father. He says this. We have to forgive for God to forgive us. It's required. Joseph wasn't able to forgive at first. At first, he had to forget. And that act of forgetting nearly cost him everything.
I think it's so cool that you talk about like forgiving and forgetting, because that's a big hang up for people who are in the process of forgiving, or like realizing that there's something that they need to work through to forgive. And with a lot of the women that I've talked to in mentoring and counseling and different things, one of the biggest things that they're afraid of is that if they forgive, then they have to act like they forgot what happened. And this restoration has to be permanent, and like they can't set boundaries. And I think it's notable for Joseph here because he's got it twisted just like we do. And when you forgive, you don't forget. Even your body has a way of holding on to that trauma and that pain, and it goes with you throughout your life. And so I see that here with Joseph quite a bit. And he never really has that full restoration. He saves them. He brings them into this new land, and he preserves life for them, and he feeds them and takes care of their needs. But he's never really one with them. Just like in the last chapter, he won't sit with them. He won't even sit with the Egyptians. He doesn't know what order of operations to do this whole forgiveness thing in. And that's so stinking relatable.
The trouble with forgiving is that it doesn't erase what's happened. And we can't pretend that it does. And God doesn't pretend that it does. For God, as far as when he talks about basically treating your sin as if it never happened, the ultimate fate of us all who belong to God is one day our past will be erased. But also this world will be erased. It bears the scars of our evil forever. And so in order to truly start over, in order to truly wipe all sin clean, the old world has to die. Because the truth is, evil is a corruption, and you can't fully wipe it away as long as you live. God can give you healing, but the scars will remain.
And it twists us. Like we're twisted.
And I think we as Christians and like even those leading people through stuff like this misrepresent what it's like. Like we had miscarriages, and that was something that is very traumatic in my past. And I can see how God used that for good. And Joseph even in this story says that God uses it for good. But that's something where I lament that multiple days a year. Like that is not something that I'm just going to forget. And I was angry at God for a long time, and who am I to forgive God? But I don't hold any resentment towards that, but I still lament having those miscarriages. And I still lament the horrible relationship that I had with my father growing up. And that's okay. You can forgive and still lament what is lost in that sense. And I think we as Christians get in this mindset where that can't bother me anymore. If God is good and I really forgave and I really moved on, then I would never think about it again. It wouldn't impact any of my decisions going forward. I wouldn't ever have any kind of ill feelings about. You can have bad days too, and that person, like in a relationship, like somebody can have hurt you. And this is where I think a lot of like coming into relationships with a pure marriage bed is very important, because a lot of relationships that bring that into the marriage have trauma that connects them to past relationships as well. And it is not something that is forgotten.
Yeah. In my story, it's very complicated. My life story, my testimony. And I've never really been able to find a way to express my full testimony in one place at one time, because so many things have happened. And there have been a lot of counselors, biblical counselors and pastors who have said things to me like, yeah, but God's using it. You're helping so many people and it's amazing. And it's just so wonderful how God can take wicked things and make them beautiful. And I had a pastor give me this book. I met him last year, and he gave me this book, and he was like, I really think that you need to read this. And it was the book Spiritual Depression. And I started reading this book, and I just got mad that the message of this book was, you have to be so careful how people outside of the church interpret your demeanor, because if you're sad, if you're depressed, if you're mourning, or if you are lamenting things that have happened to you in your life, you will turn them away from the church, because sad people don't belong in Christianity. And I'm probably one of the saddest people I know. I have just like a naturally sad disposition. I have gone through a lot of things in my life. I'm a very joyful person. I think my joy and my sadness balance each other. Sometimes it goes unchecked and I go into dark places. But I think that's real, and I think that's what's happening with Joseph. And if I were to go into every interaction with every non-believer or every doubter or every deconstructing Christian that I have met, and I were to say, my life sucked, but it's okay because God is redeeming it, they wouldn't believe me. There are people that I know who've worked in ministry, and most of their life has been pretty easy, and they have really supportive parents, and they have a really stable life story, and they have a college education that got paid for in full with no student debt and a happy marriage, and they never lost a baby. And when I share some of my story with them, their eyes glaze over because they have no idea what I'm talking about. They can't conceive of the amount of despair that I have felt in my life. And I envy those people because their life has been more simple, and that's a gift from God. But Joseph's story isn't like that. My story isn't like that. And if we whitewash these stories, then we dumb down all of these things that have happened that make us human, that prove our need for God, that prove God's goodness, because we are stuck in a sinful world. We ourselves are sinful. We can't live ignoring the crap that people have gone through. And we certainly can't put it on Joseph to just skip through the daisies with his brothers after all of this. I certainly couldn't. I'm no contact with my adoptive mother. Like, I don't hold it against Joseph. I totally understand where he's coming from. And I think it makes this story more holy, not less.
Yeah, I think you see the redemptive factor more when you allow those tensions to play out in Scripture instead of being like, oh yeah, he just completely forgot all of his hardships and his brothers are just hunky-dory now, just loving each other, and they live happily ever after, tiptoeing through the tulips and the fields of Goshen. I don't see that in the text.
Some people are really uncomfortable with this. If that's you, like, that's okay. You don't have to be comfortable with this. But for some people, this is life-changing. For me, this has been a life-changing experience going through the story like this. It's made me more teachable. It's made me more curious. It's made me more adaptable to understand the story in this way. And it's not because I feel like I need to glorify the arc of Satan in Joseph's story. That's not the point. It's the relatability. Like, finally, there's somebody who understands me in the Scripture reading to me.
It feels more honest to the text too. Reading it in this light, it feels more honest to the original intent. Like, one of the things that struck me about this story and how I haven't noticed it before, if you're a traditional biblical reader from a literal view, Moses compiled, wrote, did all of the books of Torah in succession, what is right after this story? It's Moses' story. He is now giving the Genesis story to a post-Exodus people who are wondering why they got into this in the first place at all. He is telling the story of how they got to where they are, how they were so enslaved before. It is Joseph, then it is the Exodus. Like, you think the culture hearing this at that time was like, oh, Joseph is awesome. Like,
they weren't skipping around maypoles.
He's the one who brought us here. We love him. I don't see that in the text. I don't anymore.
It feels heavy and full of grief.
And if we are going to consider Judah's sacrifice that we're going to see just very shortly, if we're going to see that as typology for Christ's sacrifice, how valuable of a sacrifice is it if Joseph is just playing games with them to test them to see if they're honest? How much more powerful is it if Joseph is genuinely going to take Benjamin away and is genuinely framing his other brothers for a crime that this time they didn't commit, but really in the past they did?
You look at generational curses, like you look at statistics for addiction, child abuse, sexual abuse. Those cycles repeat generationally, and it's horrible, but it's true. If Joseph's intention was to inflict on his little brother exactly what he went through, it's sick.
I don't believe that he wanted his little brother to feel what he feel, and yet ultimately that's what would have happened.
It's what's implied.
Yes. I think he wanted his little brother with him, but ultimately that means framing his other brothers for selling him. And yes, I get it. He's ultimately framing them for the crime that they did commit against him. And then his father will then believe that Benjamin was sold to the Egyptians, just like he was. I get it. But ultimately, you're right, Gina. How's Benjamin supposed to feel in any of this? It's an endless, repeated cycle of the terrible, awful family dynamics, and no one is actually learning anything, and no one is forgiving anyone else. And it's not until Judah takes true responsibility and says enough, without even fully realizing the full scope of what he's doing. I don't think he's that intelligent of a man. I don't feel like he's that bright. I think he knows what he needs to do in the moment, and he does it. He makes that decision, and in doing so, he saves everyone. He takes on the sin of his brothers, and he also unknowingly takes on the sin of Joseph.
He fights and defeats the adversary here in this generous offering. This is where we see the fulfillment of the Christological sacrifice through Judah, not through Joseph, not really through Benjamin, through Judah. And he is in the line, the bloodline of Christ. It's not an accident that he's the one that was chosen, and he is the one who offered to redeem an innocent brother. But just talking through divination, one of the things that struck me in your study, Ben, of this word for serpent and divination, it made me ask the question, is the serpent in Eden the first instance of divination in the Bible? And keeping in mind that divination doesn't necessarily mean using cups and bowls to determine the future or whatever. It could just be the seeking of knowledge outside of God.
Through spiritual means, yes. And I would agree that, yes, actually, if we're looking both at the words and at what the words mean, yeah, it was the first instance of Nehesh in the Bible.
How can we connect that to modern times? Like, what would be considered divination today that's not crystals and stuff, but just things that maybe even Christians today are claiming, but really have nothing to do with God? Would you agree with me that some of this NAR movement stuff is along those lines? Is it worth talking about?
Yes. I think a lot of the like empty promises of, I don't know, like, I don't know if I would consider it like seeking knowledge or.
It's not really seeking, it's just promising knowledge.
Yeah, it's like a false promise of something that's going to happen that they have no business promising or elevating themselves. Could more see the connection to the problem of pride and the elevation of self in the NAR movement to like Joseph Satan connection that we've been making is like they've elevated themselves to this prophet or apostle, or I can't even remember the fivefold, whatever that they claim that they are. More of elevating oneself to that they are the Josephs in the story, that they can give healing and provision and wealth and all this other type of stuff that's just not within their power to do so.
One of the things that I thought about when we were studying this a couple of months ago, at the peak of Cody being unemployed and me getting really sick, we went to this night of worship at a coffee shop locally. And my heart was really desperate, and I was wrestling, and I was like, God, should we leave Florida? Should we figure out long distance podcasting? Should we walk away from everything we know and move in with Cody's mom, or buy a shack on the side of a mountain, or live out of an RV? What are we going to do here? And it was before we had moved out of our house, because we lost our house earlier this year. And we were at this night of worship. And all of a sudden, one of the singers is, and there's a pastor here who wants to just speak words over people. And I'm like, all right. But my heart was so desperate. I was like, please don't call on me, but please call on Cody. And they did. The guy did. And he starts off and I just see God next to you, and he's got his arm around you, and he just loves you, and he's your friend, and he just wants to be with you. And he's there. He's just right there. And like all of this beautiful friendship stuff about God. And I'm like very moved, and I'm thinking, okay. And then he says, and God is just telling me, you have to get up and go. And I'm like, oh, go? We have to go? And then he keeps talking, and I'm like, okay, we're leaving Florida. This is happening. God is confirming all of this. And then all of a sudden he looks at Cody and you don't need all of those substances. And I'm like, wait, what substances? And I just looked at him, and I was so defeated and sad, because I really thought someone was speaking prophetically and truthfully over us. And that last sentence just killed it. It completely killed it. It broke my trust, and it made me feel like it was just a straight lie. And I was seeking this knowledge from God and whoever would give it to me. And in this case, I'm blessed that God gave me the big giant red flag that he did, because we're still in Florida.
Thank God for that.
I know. Could you imagine if we had gone because of that man, just off of that? No, we wouldn't be obedient. We would be no better than Joseph. And I think in my heart, I was seeking a divination situation because I desperately wanted to know what God had next. And guess what? It's been almost 18 months and I still have no idea.
Yeah, we're waiting on a lot. What's next?
We're waiting on the Lord.
It's weird because the Lord, I think our listeners know that God has spoken both to Gina and to Cody in a language they don't know, in ancient Hebrew. And he said radically different things to both of them. I'm the only one here who hasn't gotten the talk yet. And who knows, maybe that'll never happen. But Gina was told basically by God that it was going to be a long time.
In the desert.
A long time in the desert. And yeah, there's a story, I believe it's in 1 Samuel, that covers King Saul. He drives all the mediums and spiritists out, and the last judge of Israel, Samuel, is dead. But he can't seem to find any word from God anywhere. He's not getting talked to. And because God's not talking to him, he decides to go to the Witch of Endor, and he tries to force a conversation. Not with God, but with a dead man.
I love this story so much, it makes me laugh.
And when you're a Christian and you've been a Christian for a while and things are easy, you think, oh, that's so stupid. He makes a deal with a witch and speaks to a dead dude, and who knows, maybe that didn't even happen.
But
I don't know.
He's the wisest dead dude.
He's a super wise dead dude. And he basically gets told exactly what he should have already known anyway. So what was the point of all that? And yet, if you've been in a dry period yourself, a time in the desert where it feels like you have nothing, and you would kill for a single drop of water, suddenly it makes a lot more sense why Saul does what he does. Because that's the truth. It's like when you're going through rough times, but you feel God's presence beside you and he's speaking, it's actually pretty easy. Because you feel the purpose behind it and you feel a strength that's not your own propelling you forward. It's almost effortless. But then that dries up and suddenly God's saying, okay, now, for right now,
Wait.
You don't understand why. You have to wait, and you have to rely on what I've taught you. And I will be there, but you won't feel me. You won't see me.
St. Paul is such a good example of that. He got one vision and it sustained him. I've had more than one vision. I've had more than one word.
And how quickly we forget, whether intentionally or not. And forgetting is almost a sin in and of itself. Remembering is an act of worship. We have to remember. It's like we're constantly told throughout the Bible, and the Lord remembered. For the sake of his servant David, he remembered, he didn't forget, he didn't blot out. The act of blotting out is an act of violent destruction by God. To blot out someone's name, their memory. We have to remember, because God commands us to remember. But it's not an easy thing to do.
No, and I think you see that throughout the Bible. When they crossed the Jordan, they set up the 12 stones. You have the story of Jacob making all these altars, and like scripture always says, and it's still there to this day, or it's used as a remembrance. And it's because we and God knows that we're forgetful people. Like we easily forget where we've come from and who we serve. And like we're very in the now people, and I'm guilty of that too. Like this season has been very difficult, and it is very hard not to just do what is God telling me to? I think so. Let's go do it.
Yeah, it's within our budget to do this, so let's just do it. And then we're like, but wait, we weren't told.
There's been a lot more like financially smart things that we could have done in this season for moving or doing something different or getting the heck out of Dodge, so to speak. But we still haven't heard from God. And one of the things that Gina and I promised is to ourselves and to God, we're not moving. We're not unless you go before us, we're not going. Like that is our stance. And
even though we're really struggling with the patience and
the patience is hard. And thankfully I'm working again and that helps, but
it helps. But listen, guys, Cody's been gone for the last 3 weeks and he's getting ready to leave again. We've been recording for like giant sessions just to make sure you have content on Tuesdays. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our podcast today. If you liked what you heard, please feel free to subscribe and share and leave a positive review. And if you would like to connect with us on social media, you can do so on Instagram and Facebook at The Logic of God. You can also send us an email at main.thelogicofgod@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening. We hope you have a great day.